Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. It's a quite warm afternoon here in Portland, Oregon in Zone 8B. I'm sitting in the permaculture food forest in my backyard. This is part of my poultry run and I have just fed them their afternoon snack, and so they're all hanging out with me, hoping maybe I'll have something else good to eat. The turkeys keep trying to get my ring. We're just having a good old time. So as I'm sitting here, I was thinking about how I've had to water more this year than in a typical year. And recently, a meme that was made of my garden went viral, and one of the most common comments on there was, her water bill must be huge. And it's actually not. When I say that I've had to water more this year than in a typical year, I've had to water 4 times. Yes, that is more than I would typically water. And so I thought this is a good opportunity to respond to that concern that if I have a permaculture garden like Angela, I'm gonna have a huge water bill. By talking about the ways I have designed my garden to actually be really efficient in how it uses water, and so that I don't have a large water bill. I could not afford this garden if I had a high water bill. I have designed it so that I don't have to spend very much on water. Permaculture needs to be reproducible for folks in subsistence communities. It needs to be doable for folks on a tight budget. It should not be accessible only to those with deep pockets. And so I want to make sure that the methods that I use here are affordable, not only because our family is on a tight budget, but also because I want other folks to be able to do permaculture. So let's talk about some of the ways that I reduce water loss in my garden and make sure that I don't have to water very much. First off, in a typical summer, we have 3 months of no rain. So we have rain 9 months of the year here, and then it's very dry July, August, and September. That means if I have to do water storage, I only have to do it for about 3 months. I would like to expand the water storage capabilities that I have. That is our goal for next year, as I'm budgeting for what I want to spend on the garden next year and what we can afford to do. I want to have more rainwater catchment and storage. Because our summers are getting hotter and drier, I find that, like I said, I had to water 4 times so far this summer, and I'll probably have to water at least 1 to 2 more times before the rain comes back. And that will be a record. The record number of times I've had to water my garden in a summer was last year. I had to water 6 when we were in the height of a drought, and it was very, very dry out. And this year will probably be similar. So if we're having a warming, drying summer season here, I need to make some adjustments to my system. And that includes getting rainwater roof runoff capture in the garden from my house, from our sheds, and from my greenhouse in particular. So that will be forthcoming in the next year. But that's a way that I need to tweak and evolve my design as the climate is evolving. But even with that, I water very little compared to your average gardener. And I don't actually water most of the garden at all. When I say I have to water 6 times, I mean annual veggies. Now I do water, obviously, baby starts by hand. I water things in pots like my lemon trees. And so those have to get watered every 1 to 2 days, but it's not a large quantity. I have 2 lemon trees, right? And for those things, they require extra special care. For baby trees that I have planted out and are brand new, those get watered once a week with a 5-gallon bucket for the first 1 to 2 years, depending on what the summer's like and what species of tree it is. Once it is established, I do not water it at all. So the number one thing that I use to conserve water, as you can hear ducks bathing behind me, is that I use a thick layer of mulch. I talk about wood chips a lot. I use chop and drop mulch. I use imported wood chips from sources like Chip Drop or the electric utility. I create a thick carpet of biomass that will eventually break down and form humus, but at the moment is acting like a carpet or a blanket on top of the soil, protecting it from the beating rays of the sun, protecting it from being desiccated by the intense sunshine of summer. Wood chips do a great job of holding moisture against the soil and preventing water loss through evaporation. They are the single biggest thing that I use in my garden to save on my water bill. Not only that, wood chips as they break down become spongier and spongier, and so they actually trap and hold the rainwater. And that gets me to my second thing that I do, is I reduce runoff in my garden. Either from rain or from intentional watering. A big way to waste water is that much of it runs off the beds and never gets down into the plants themselves. Now, if you use purchased compost, sometimes it can be quite hydrophobic. So you want to be careful that you are not having the water just sheet off the top of your bed and never sink into your plants in the first place. But also to reduce runoff, I have carefully designed beds where the shape of the bed encourages water flow into the bed and then holds it. So I have these kidney bean shaped annual veggie beds. I have swales built into the garden so that I am channeling water where I want it to go. So if water overflows from one bed, it runs into another instead of running off into a place where the water is wasted. The water is caught and held against the bed so that it has time to sink into the bed itself before any excess water flows on to the next bed. Reducing runoff is a fantastic way to get every drop of water that you put on your garden to the plants that need it. Next is the few times I do have to water, I water early in the morning when all of the stomata on my plants are open, when they are receptive to soaking up, drinking up that water. That's when I want to water. A lot of people I see running their sprinklers in the middle of the afternoon when the plants are less likely. They're just hunkering down and trying to, stay alive in the heat. You may see your plants wilt. That's a way the plant is conserving water and preventing water loss. They seal up their stomata so that they can't lose water through the process of transpiration. You want to make sure that when you water, it's early in the morning, that you are not losing water to evaporation in the afternoon, or you're not watering at a time when your plants aren't receptive to it. Caveat is potted plants do best when watered late in the afternoon or early in the evening, but from the garden itself, early in the morning. Also, if you water in the afternoon, you are more likely to produce powdery mildew in your garden, so you get the double bonus of watering in the morning, a more efficient use of water and reduction in the risk of powdery mildew. The next thing is that I think about my garden as a sponge. I focus on building soil. So much of what happens in my garden is I build soil and the garden responds favorably. I'm creating a healthy soil microbiome. I am building topsoil. Good, rich organic matter is itself a vehicle for holding moisture in the soil. When you have very sandy soil, the water just runs on through it. When you have clay soil, you find it may pool on the top and may not soak down into the roots. You want that rich organic matter to let the water sink in enough, and then the soil itself just soaks it up and holds it like a sponge. And then your plants are more readily able to access that water and less is lost. Two other quick things. I try to reduce water loss by wind, and this may be one that you may not have thought of. Those plants that are more susceptible to wind damage, I plant in sheltered areas. I make sure that the edges of my property, where the wind comes in this way, across the property, that I have a hedgerow sheltering the garden from water loss from wind, particularly if you live in very arid climates. Wind can just suck the water out of your plants and absolutely desiccate them. So having shelter from the wind is important. Again, I do that with hedgerows. I do that with careful planting of my larger, more drought tolerant trees and shrubs in the windiest parts of my garden, providing a little windbreak for other plants. The last thing is that I plant natives. If you want a garden where you don't have to water very much at all, and you aren't necessarily looking for peak food production, annual veggies are very water thirsty. Let's be real. If you want a big annual veggie garden, you're gonna spend more money on water, or you're gonna have to catch more rainwater and use it in your garden. But if you just want a garden for aesthetics, or you want to create swaths of habitat for wildlife, plant natives. They are adapted to your climate. That means they are adapted to the periods where you are lacking water. They are going to be the most hardy and resilient and require the least amount of babying. So I hope that was helpful to you all. I'll be back really soon for my permaculture garden. In the meantime, if you could check out my Patreon down below, that would be awesome. If you could consider clicking like and subscribe, that would be equally awesome. Thanks.
You just helping yourself there, Blondie.